Welcome to Göteborg Film Festival. My name is Jonas Holmberg and I'm the artistic director of the festival, and I'm sitting here on the stage of the Cinema Draken, the main premiere venue of the festival. Today it's unfortunately empty due to the COVID-19 situation, but I'm happy because I'm not here alone. I'm very proud to be sitting here with the recipient of this year's Honorary Dragon Award, Ruben Östlund.
Hello. Hey.
Hello. Very welcome.
Tack.
You're in the middle of editing Triangle of Sadness,
Yeah.
your new film, and we will talk a little bit more about that later, but just to check in, how is everything going?
Everything is going well, or it's going in the way that it's always going when you are in an editing process. You have like peaks and you have deep bottom valleys where you're adopting in the project. But so it's going up and down like that. But it's at the same time it's very, how to say, a process that is much less stressful than shooting, at least these days. The shooting that we were dealing with was completely different than it usually is. And now it's getting back to the editing and you just have time to sit with the material yourself. So it's something that I really enjoy at the same time as it's mentally kind of challenging. So yeah, and I'm here in Göteborg. I'm like not far away from this cinema. And walking there to the office every day and have a very simple daily routine, basically.
And you're editing yourself?
Yes.
Yeah. You're always doing that?
Yes,
Yeah.
I have, but I've also used help from editors. I've been working with Jakob Hultzinger, that is a Danish editor, and what I usually do is that I edit the scenes myself individually, and then we put them together, and we are working with the structure and the in and out points of the scenes together. And he has a very good feeling for the dynamics, to create the dynamics of the film. But individually, it's very important for me to edit the scenes myself.
I know different filmmakers treat this differently, but how much do you feel that you are constructing the film in the editing room, or you're constructing it beforehand?
I mean, I think that is... you have heard of horror examples when people have not decided anything when they are shooting sometimes, you know, that they are just filming, and then they are hopefully going to solve this problem in the editing room. And I have tried to avoid that because if you have too many options in the editing room, you don't really get any energy out of the editing. You have to have some kind of frames. So it's very different when it comes to how I have shot the scene. Sometimes the scene is very precise shot, you know, I decided exactly what's going to happen. And sometimes it's a conversation where I'm looking for some kind of energy, or like some kind of, for a certain kind of like feeling from the characters. And then it's treating the scene a little bit more freely when I'm shooting it. But when I get to the editing, I always have a problem with these scenes, because then you have so many possibilities.
Yeah.
And I have just been in a situation like this. I've had a scene there where the actors were much more free and we were improvising a little bit more than I usually do, and then going to a one single take shot where we had a really precise scenario of exactly what the actors should do. And it's so nice to get to these scenes when you're editing, because then the frame is fixed and you can just like trying to improve the scene. Yeah. But you know, I have examples of friends that have had projects when they have decided, I will decide everything in the editing. They don't even have decided what the film is about before they start the editing. And then they have a huge problem when they are doing the editing. And I think an advice to all filmmakers is, at least from my point of view, don't do that.
Great. We will get back more to Triangle of Sadness, of course, later, and also watch a few images from your storyboard later on. But let's move back a little. Let's move back to the start, where everything started. You grew up here in Göteborg, outside Göteborg, on an island called Styrsö in the archipelago. And this is also a place where that's visible in many of your early films. What was it like growing up there?
I liked it. I was actually, my parents moved out there in 1974, the same year that I was born. So they were new on the island, and I was living in a house together with my father and my mother and my brother. which is 8 years older than me. And I mean, it's interesting to talk about upbringing and talk about the village that you come from, because it's hard to say how it really was, because you can't compare with anything, you know, like it was like it was. But when I older I have understood also that people are looking at it in a kind of exotic way, that you live on an island without cars, or there are just a few cars, and you have to take a ferry to come to the city, and you're isolated in some way, and it's very dark and stormy during the falls, and the summers can be very beautiful. And yeah, I mean, it's like a childhood that has its ups and downs, also independent. Like my parents divorced when I was 4 years old, and then that was probably a big part of my life at that time. And but the island in itself is also, yeah, you have, this is your playground, and if you go in that direction in 10 minutes, then you will get to the ocean, and if you go 20 minutes in that direction, then you have the ocean. So it's also a very limited setup. It's almost like when you're deciding, I'm going to shoot the scene with only a single take, you know. This is what we have, this is where we can what we can use when we want to play and have fun as a kid. So yeah, let's see if I move back there. I don't know, maybe.
Given your big interest in monkeys, that has been evident in your films.
Yeah.
I read that your mother was inspired by a chimpanzee mother bringing you up. Is that true?
Yes, she have said that in an interview at least. It was something like that, you know, every time a baby monkey falls, the mother should help it lift it up so it gets up on its feet again. I don't know if it was a chimpanzee, and then step back, and then lift it up, step back. At a certain point, the baby monkey will slap the mother on the hand. Don't touch me anymore, you know, like. So that's at least the story she tells about it.
And you don't know.
I don't remember that, at least.
But both your parents were teachers, but your mother was also an artist. Was that important for you, that she was an artist?
I mean, both my parents were doing something. My father was very interested in photography, and my mother was very interested in painting. And I think it was, for me, a big part of my upbringing was colored by that my mother comes from the very north part of Sweden, Haparanda, that is on the border to Finland. And she moved away from there when she was 19 years old, and went to Lund, that is a university city in Sweden, in southern of Sweden, where she meets my dad, and quite quickly get pregnant with my brother. And suddenly she realized, I will not go back to Haparanda again. And Haparanda and the southern part of Sweden is like very different atmosphere. Like the winters are very snowy. The sun doesn't come up really in the winters. And there's a smaller community where everybody knows everybody. And if I look at my mother's interest in painting, she was always, you know, like every day when I got into the downstairs, we were sleeping upstairs, and I got downstairs, she was sitting in front of these pictures. There was like a bird's eye view on Haparanda, where you see all the buildings and you see all different peoples walking on the streets, and it's the snow, and she could point on every single person on that picture and tell me who it was, and tell a story about that person. And she always asked me, can you have a look on the picture? What do you think? Is it something that you don't like? Is it something that looks strange? And she always brought me in and used me as a third eye that she also relied on. And for me, she was giving me a little bit. I think she gave me some confidence to trust on my own instrument when I was looking at these pictures. So that was really something that I remember. And she was like sitting in this just a normal room. What do you say? Fluorescent light in the roof, and just hours and hours and hours sitting in front of these paintings. And I don't know how many of these paintings she did, but there's at least 30 of like this bird's view perspective of Haparanda, with the summer, winter, Christmas Eve, and processing these memories. And I remember she always said that, okay, when you and Marcus, my brother, when you are old and you are moved out, then I will move back to Haparanda.
Yeah.
But then when we were old. Suddenly we got kids, and she became a grandmother. So she stayed on Styrsö, and but it was really a way of processing her, something that she was missing, I guess. And then my father, he's dealing with photography. Was dealing a lot with photography when I was younger, but I think it's interesting when you look at the background, because then you realize also that the decision of the job that I have, that I became a director and so, it's not a coincidence. It's something that you also inherit from the culture of your parents. And I mean, and not at least that they are teachers, that they're coming from an academic background. But my father's grandfather, he was one of the mecenats, one that started Halmstadgruppen. And Halmstadgruppen is a collective of painters that was surrealist painters that was very inspired by Dalí and so on, and was the first surrealistic art movement in Sweden. And he told a lot of stories about his grandfather. My father told me a lot of stories about his grandfather, how they have said to the members of this group, okay, you can fight as much as you want, but always stick together. Always like treat yourself as a collective. Inside the collective, you can like have different opinions and so on. But when we are like talking about us as a collective, it's very important that we always talk about the group. And so they managed to get some kind of reputation by this attitude towards each other, and towards always lifting up. Every time they made an interview, they talked about the Halmstadgruppen. So by not only bringing attention to themselves, but also bringing attention to the colleagues.
Would you like to be part of such a group?
I think it's super important to try to strive for having a collective or a group around you that you can get energy from. And I think it would be important to create, if like we want to have a vital Swedish film life, I think it would be very interesting if it can be a couple of these groups, because then it becomes almost like football teams that are competing with each other in some way. So yes, I think I'm quite good in creating that collective around me, creating that kind of group around me. But I can really see how many of these ideas that have been, like how we should run Platform Production, the production company in Göteborg, that I have together with a couple of friends. Many of the ideas of how to run it also comes from, at least when I think back, I see it like it comes from also these things that my father told me about Halmstadgruppen.
Yeah. So. But you consider your production company as a movement, or with some aesthetical ideas, or in this way?
I would love that it was a movement. But what happened for me and the directors that is in the same generation as me was that we started on film school in Göteborg, the one that I know. The directors that I know, that we met in Göteborg on the film school in Göteborg, today called Akademi Valand Film. And we were lucky because there was a paradigm change in the techniques when we went to the school. Like the small digital DV camera have just came and was affordable to buy also for consumers. And I remember the VX2s and the Sony camera. It's like everybody loved it. You know, it was great. And we was of course inspired of the Dogma movement in their approach of using this technique and not being limited to super big budget and so on. And the school that we went to in Göteborg, there was a school in Stockholm, or there is a school in Stockholm that at that time was called Dramatiska Institutet, and they were like the expensive school that I could afford to shoot on real film, and we had very limited budget. But I think that was perfect for us at that time, because we started to use the creativity and started to use this new technique. So. I think it's something that is like that can make a certain kind of movement happen a little bit at least, even if it's not like the 60s movement in France and so on. But it happened something with us because it gave us some energy that we could use this new technique. So it's great when you see there's an invention in the technique and you in some way can use it, because that changes the language of cinema just as much as it comes a new director that have a completely different language, like image language, or like to look for the new parts of the technique that is possible to use. And we were lucky then, and were in the school at that time, and that was like really the starting point for us. And I met Erik Hemmendorf on the school. I met my former wife Andrea Östlund on the school, and Axel Danielsson, Mikael C. Karlsson. There's a lot of people that we work together today that had like the meeting point in the school, even if we were in different grades. And we met Kalle Boman at that school. That really became like a mentor for all of us in our collective.
Talking about cameras and new technique, do you remember your first encounter with the video camera as young?
The video camera, yeah, but it was, and that is also something that was like very, how do you say, a crossing, or like this is where I actually decided that I was going to be interested in filming and so on. And it, first of all, okay, I had a father that had given me like a small compact camera that I could take pictures on, and I saw that he was always doing it and so on. But then on Styrsö there was something called Styrsö Fritid that was like how to say, kommunal institution where we could go as the young people could go and have things to do on our spare time, or when we were free from school. So it was not only sports. It was actually this Styrsö Fritid, and at Styrsö Fritid you could borrow a Super VHS, a Super VHS camera, and an editing. and we got, like, we just went there and you signed something, and then you got to borrow this camera for free. And what we were doing was we were filming windsurfing. We were very interested in like action sport, as it's called today, like biking and windsurfing and things like that. And we spend a lot of time to film these activities, and then we cut it together, and we could borrow that equipment. And I think it was very, very important that the luxury of us being able to do that made it possible for me to start to practicing this profession. Yeah.
And then your interest in action sport brought you to...
It's a horrible category.
Yeah, but it brought you to the Alps, where you spent several years skiing and filming skiing.
Yeah.
And what encouraged you to do this?
Well, I was always following my mother up to Haparanda in the winters, and then there was a lot of snow there, and I loved to be in the snow, and as most kids, I guess. And I started to fall in love in skiing, in alpine skiing. I don't know why, really. It was just, yeah, I don't know why. But got very interested in it. And started to buy ski films, and I was like ordering ski films on VHS from the US, from a ski magazine that was called Powder Magazine. You know, like you could see these ads of this ski film, and you send the money in the envelope and send it over to the US, and you was waiting every day for this film to come in your mailbox. And finally, when it came, and like you realize it was a different system, so it was you couldn't watch it. So you had to like try to get a new VHS player, which was like a huge obstacle at that time. But then I watched these films over and over and over again. Sorry, but so I built up my interest and my, how to say, dream world was like from watching these images of like skiing in powder and these steep hills and jumping these cliffs and reading magazines about skiing. And I decided very early, when I was around 12 years old or something, as soon as I'm finished with high school, I will work that summer, and then I will spend my first winter in the Alps. So that was even much more important than filming skiing, which I started to do later on. Yeah.
And you made two like proper films filming skiing that are available and also is possible to watch for the audience
And maybe
during
four,
the festival.
actually.
Four, yeah, there are
Yeah.
two included in the retrospective in the festival.
Yeah.
Free Radicals 1 and Free Radicals 2.
Yeah.
Let's watch a clip from the first one of these. A scene from Free Radicals 1. This is an avalanche, and for me, it's of course connected to one of your most iconic scenes, the avalanche in Force Majeure, even though the main character is not watching the avalanche, but is in it. How do you feel those two scenes relate to each other?
No, maybe not specifically this one. I mean, this was a skier that is called Erik Mossfeldt, and we were skiing in a small village in Switzerland that was called Disusses, and this was something that you always were scared of when you were in the Alps and when you were in the mountains, and you were constantly thinking about that this could happen. So it was something that was very present when you were filming, and when you were filming skiers that was skiing on a face for the first time, because that increases the danger, of course, if no one have skied there before and you are putting the first tracks, because then you're cutting up the snow layers, and then avalanches can surprise you, and you were very scared of this all the time. And this was one of the most scariest moments that I have experienced, because I was not sure that if he was above the snow or if he was under the snow when I ski down to the spot in order to try to find him. Luckily, he was above the snow. But I mean, I think all these experiences that I had in the Alps, to be in a ski resort, to be in the mountains, was something that when I later on started at film school and started to make fiction films, that I was thinking about, is there a possibility for me to use this experience, go back to that world and look at it from a little different kind of perspective. I think at that time when I was filming the skiing, I loved to be there and I loved to be on a ski resort, but slowly I started to get tired of being in a ski resort. There were such artificial villages, and many of them. And I knew that I in some way wanted to use the knowledge that I have about that world. And I mean, an avalanche is spectacular. At the same time as you're scared of it, it's fantastic to watch it, look at it, and the reason that I came up with the idea, it was a combination of another person's idea actually. But the reason that I ended up doing this as a course for Force Majeure was I was watching YouTube clips of avalanches. And then it was a clip from a French ski resort, and you saw a lot of tourists sitting on an outdoor restaurant on a terrace, and they are watching an avalanche that is coming tumbling down a mountainside in quite far distance. And everybody's like cheering, and they're like, "Ooh, wow, beautiful!" You know. And the avalanche gets bigger, and the screaming gets louder, and people are really like, "Wow," enjoying it. And then there was these 3 seconds when the enjoyment goes over to nervous laughter, and then like into complete panic. And people are like starting to cry and starting to flee and starting to run away. And this avalanche, it stops before the restaurant, so it's only the snow smoke that gets seen over the terrace where people were sitting. But everybody's running away, but 20 seconds later they realize there was no danger, so they have to go back and sit down and continue with their lunch again. And I think that I was like fascinated by such a dense moment when you had excitement, fear, and then you have to go back to a normal normal day. I love that these three different moods were so close to each other. And like the kind of embarrassment of people that have let go of their controlled civilized side, then have to go back and eat lunch. And when I was thinking about this scene, my first thing, the first I did when we were doing Force Majeure, that originally was named Tourist, was to have 4 different situations where you see like upper middle class families going on vacation in summer or winter or whatever. It was a ferry, it was a bus, and that the small changes of like a ferry is not leaving and you're not allowed to go on the ferry is creating like a kind of an emergency situation for them, and they are trying to handle something that actually doesn't have any physical danger, but it's just changing the setup for them. And and I told a friend about this film, Leif Edlund Johansson is his name. I told him about this film, and this is a method for me because I love to talk about the films that I'm doing with all the different kind of people around me, because you always get so good input, and you're always processing the film yourself when you're trying to tell about it. And I told him about this film, and I told him about the scene in the terrace, and my idea was that it should be a family that experiencing that avalanche. And he said, like, what if the father runs away? And I'm like, there it is. I understood immediately. Okay, take away the 3 other stories. This situation with an avalanche coming, the father running away, nothing happens. He has to go back to his family. Like, okay, it's the perfect setup. Now we can really investigate how the characters is trying to deal with this situation, and and the shame of their honor culture, and trying to not lose face, and all the things that I'm interested in, basically.
Yeah, it's a beautiful scene, and it's a beautiful film, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But back to your 20s, when a young Ruben Östlund was filming in the Alps, and started making some money by doing those films, maybe, and
not really, but
not really. But what was the moment when you realized that this is what I want to dedicate my life to? I want to be a filmmaker.
I think that at that time I thought that I would dedicate my life to skiing, and there was a lot of like people in these ski resorts that then maybe have started hotel or become ski photographers, or are making ski film even if they are like 50s or something like that. So there were role models of a certain kind of lifestyle that I felt was possible for me. But after a while, as I said before, spending all this time in this ski resort, I got tired of it, and but still I love to film, and I love to edit, and I love to do the films. So I started to, at that point, like I think it was 97, the first time I applied for the film school in Göteborg, Akademivalan Film it's called now, and I was not accepted. I didn't even come to an interview. And the reason that I knew about this school was only because I had filmed some climbing in Göteborg together with a photographer that I went to the school. At that time, it was photography and editing on the school. And that's why I knew about the school. I wouldn't know about it otherwise. And after applying 1 year, I applied the second time, and then I came to an interview, and I showed these films actually, and the the selection committee or the jury was like open enough to think that I had some experience and could transform it into something else. So that's why I started to the film school. So I mean, if I wouldn't have been accepted on Göteborg Filmhögskolan in Göteborg, everything could have gone in on complete different path. Because when I came to Filmhögskolan, I was not specifically interested in film history. I have not really approached the idea about being a director from another point of view than being a ski film director. So it was a complete new world for me.
And during your time at Filmhögskolan, Valand Academy, you made two beautiful films that both were premiered at the Göteborg Film Festival. And before we talk about those films, can you tell me about your first memories of screening your first films at the festival? What was it like?
It's fun because Göteborg Film Festival is like that's the first festival that was also in my world. I didn't really know about the concept of film festivals when I started at Göteborg Filmhögskola, and people started to talk about the film festival, and like Andrea Östlund, my ex-wife, she had been here since she was young. She had worked at the festival and so on. So she told me a lot about it, and I remember going to this cinema. And experiencing the kind of atmosphere that happens in here when it's a premiere in Draken. I mean, it's a very special feeling when it is one of these premieres here. So when I was screening my first film at the festival, you want to be in the center of the attention. You didn't want to be on a small screen like Hagabion or like something like that. So you were also a little disappointed, Even if you were happy that you were screening the film and there were some other people there and you got some good comments, but you wanted to have more attention. So and when you were looking in the catalog, you was like, how does the image look? You were evaluating the kind of attention your film in comparison to the other films. So even it was almost more stressful to have a film on the festival than not having a film on the festival. It was much nicer to go here and just watch films and not being nervous about your own film.
Now you're the center of attention.
Yes,
anyway,
finally.
Those two films, in a way, they are two beautiful and very intimate films and very personal films. The first one was called Let the Others Deal with Love, about your friends, more or less. And the other one was called Family Again. And this is about your parents. And it's about your parents' divorce. Let's watch a clip from this film.
Jag hade aldrig kunnat skilja mig från dig om jag hade fått välja. Jag hade aldrig kunnat det alltså.
Nej men vadå om du hade fått välja?
Ja, eller jag hade aldrig kunnat göra det därför att det var så smärtsamt och att bli ensam och att
nej men det stämmer ju inte.
För mig, men för mig stämmer det. För mig stämmer det.
Det var ju så här. Om man tänker efter så var det så att jag sa den dagen, alltså jag vill att vi ska fortsätta att leva tillsammans, men då måste du se mig som din allra bästa vän. Så var det. Jag sa att
men samtidigt hade du ett förhållande. Det var du som ville. Du bröt ju. Du sa ju att jag skulle flytta. Du sa ju att jag skulle flytta.
Jo men Klasse, så här var det.
Du sa ju att jag
lyssna
skulle
nu.
flytta.
Jag sa så här att jag vill inte leva tillsammans med dig. Om inte du börjar se mig som din allra bästa vän. Och sen flyttade du, och det var vi väl överens om, in till Göteborg, och där skulle du bo. Och jag sa att jag flyttar inte tillbaks förrän den dagen du börjar se mig som din allra bästa vän.
Du
så var det.
Inte tillbaks.
Nej, men jag sa att vi ska inte flytta ihop igen. Förstår du?
Nej, men
så var det. Och då så åkte jag, helvete heller, så åkte
jag. Han är målare.
Det hade jag inte. Jag hade ju ringt, nej men Klasse, allvarligt talat. Sen när jag kom tillbaks ifrån Haparanda, vi var där i 6 år, då hade du träffat den här unga flickan. Och så sa du någonting som är belysande för hela. Nu skulle jag verkligen visa att jag älskade dig. Exakt det så. Jag skulle visa dig att jag älskade dig när du hade träffat den här unga flickan. Förstår du?
Nej,
exakt så sa du. Och det var som i ett nötskal. Du såg mig som din mor.
Ja,
så du kunde inte förstå.
Så kan man väl säga att relationen är färgad utav det. Det är ju en annan sak.
Jo, men jag menar, det var lite orimligt. Jo, men visst fan, man kommer inte till sin man och säger så här att nu får du visa att du älskar mig för jag har träffat en ung man.
So this was your parents many years after discussing their divorce. How does
this was like 23 years after 21 years after the divorce, and it was interesting to start doing this. And first of all, I can say this was also a little bit of a trend in filmmaking at that time. I think also once again connected with the kind of technique that suddenly have appeared, that you have light-handed DV camera with quite good quality, so you actually can be your camera operator yourself, and you can create very intimate situations when you are shooting where you don't need a lot of other people, and you can point the camera towards yourself, basically. And there was a lot of films on the school at that time. I remember Jeanette Frank was a photographer and a director that made a film about her mother, and I think all the students that were at the school at that time was very inspired by these films. I think also Linda Westrik did a film that got a lot of attention when she was making a film about her father. So we were, people were encouraging us to look for some content or something that have happened to ourselves and make that the topic of our films. And Göran Dureda was the professor of the film school. He always talked about, like, you have to look for your, like, the core of the pain in you as a human being, and what is that? And so I think this topic came a lot from the kind of atmosphere and the topics of the other films that were in the school at that time. And I think that I was falling in love with the setup. You know, my parents had been divorced for 21 years. Now both of them are actually don't have a partner again. Let's bring them together and compare their version of the divorce, and then let's see, because I've always felt they really, really love each other. There are so many sides of them that really like the other person, and they have never been able to let go of each other completely, and see what happens if they are starting to talk about this. And when I started to shoot this film, it was so obvious. You put on the camera, you ask them to start to talk about the divorce. They were 21 years back in time immediately, and for me it was just so interesting to watch that, because of course I only heard my mother's version about the divorce, since I'm brought up with my mother. I mean, I spend time with my father every second weekend, but it was not like we were talking about these things, and my mother maybe had closer to these kind of topics and talk about these things. So I had heard my mother's version, and now I was looking at my mother and my father at the same time when they were talking about this, and suddenly discovering it from a new perspective. So.
An interesting detail in the clip is where your mother turns to you and says, "Is it difficult for you to hear, Ruben?" And you said, "It's very good. The film will be great," or something like that. And but for you, was the film an excuse to get your parents to talk about these things, or was it was the idea come from this will be a good film?
But it was both, I guess. Yeah. Like, okay, this is painful to talk about, and let's dig into it. Why is it painful? Like, what is it opening up? What that like, you know, you're trained in a tradition that what is feeling painful, what is feeling strong for you is also the topics that will be the interesting films to look at, the interesting art, so that you have to go in that direction. So, but I remember after the shooting the film, and that it was a feeling of, okay, I in much wider sense now I can leave my parents' divorce behind, and like kind of therapy maybe, but it's a mix. It's always a mix. You want to do a great film, and it's good if you get therapy at the same time, right?
What struck me when I watched those films before this talk, your early films, is that you're now famous for being a filmmaker who explore ideas and analyze social systems. But if you look at those films, also Let the Others Deal with Love, with your friends, yourself are in the middle of film, interacting and being present, and not being like analyzing from a distance. Do you also see this change in your filmmaking?
But I felt very much after making Family Again, eller Familj Igen, that I didn't feel really that I had any like topics that was really, really close to me, and that I felt like I wanted to explore it and opening it up. And I didn't feel that I want to continue with documentary because I didn't want to, dig in another person's life in that way. So for me, I had been inspired of some filmmakers when I went to film school, and that also made films in a very direct, light way, where they're approaching filmmaking and feature films not from an Anglo-Saxon perspective when you have a dramaturgy with a protagonist and an antagonist, that much more wild films that was fragmentaric and just images. And so that were the point where I felt like, okay, I want to do films where I am like Haneke, like it's or Harmony Korine. These were the kind of, or Roy Andersson. Those were the ones that were inspiring, and that you felt like, I had great experiences watching their films, and I thought it was interesting with the kind of conversation that was going on, both on Haneke and Roy, maybe, and a little bit Harmony Korine, like that they were considered cold, that they were considered like not loving towards the characters, and I never felt that. I felt something completely different. I felt that their way of looking at them, even if the characters were doing things that we feel is not very sympathetic and so on, I felt a loving look even in this distance and this long way of like looking, and not just not emotionally evaluating what the characters were doing. So I was very inspired by some filmmakers, and this was probably the reason why the first feature film I made looked in the way that it looked.
Yes. After graduating from film school with this film family again, you founded, together with producer Erik Hemmendorf, that you're still working with, your production company, Platform Produktion, and that has been up and running for almost 20 years now. I noticed something that Erik said when founding this company. He said that Platform Produktion was going to make films that doesn't lie. Mm-hmm. Did you also feel that? And what kind of films did you experience that were lying?
I don't remember this quote, but I think what I remember from Platform Production was that we were looking at many of our friends that went to other production companies and started to develop projects on external production companies, and these production companies were applying for money from the Swedish Film Institute and got like developing money for the project, but the projects never happened. So you could see people putting in a lot of work in projects that never happened. And I think the starting point for Platform Production was that we want to decide when we are going to do a film or not. It's not someone else that is going to decide it. We are going to say to Swedish Film Institute, do you want to jump on the train because we are going to do a film? Okay, if you not want to be part of it, we are going to do it anyway. So kind of use the energy that you have also in the beginning, where you like can invest this in the movie, and you can use your friends to be the sound guy. I mean, Erik was, we started to work together because I needed someone that was taking sound on the shootings of the Guitar Mongoloid. And so that's how we started to work together. And then we decided to start Platform Production, and that was, you were very, like, you looked a lot at films, and you were critical, and you were looking at what was in the Swedish cinemas at that time. And I think that the feeling was in the Swedish cinemas, it was not really used, the technique change. The films were still produced as they were produced in the 90s and the 80s. So we felt that there's like a newer version, more interesting version of cinema that we could contribute with, and that we can also conquer a certain space in the Swedish film industry, or the attention, like. So I think the approach was more, for me, it was much more punk. It was much more like you want to provoke something because you feel that this is so conform, like everything looks the same. And I think that I was very in love with the idea of, we had this film critics, Nils Petter Sundgren, that was sitting in Filmkrönikan. That was this TV program for films in Sweden at that time. That he every week was sitting there and looking at at his different movies, and that he one week had to review the Guitar Mongoloid, and it's going to be so different, so he would not know how he should relate to it.
Yes, Guitar Mongoloid was your first feature film, and it really did provoke some people. Let's watch the opening scene of this film.
4, 3, 2, 1, och starta orkestern nu.
Solljuset dansar på fjärden. Det glittrar för stort och för smått. För träkåken uppe på söder, men även för konungens slott. Det porlar i fiskrika strömmar, det valsar i Mälarens famn. Det skymmer och skänker och strömmar, sjungandes sjöstadens namn. Och så spelar kören som går i fjärr.
So these are the first images of your first feature film, and it's about cultural sabotage. It's it's the first. It's what we're seeing is the maybe most popular TV show in Sweden, Allsång i Skansen, and then somebody destroying it. Did you feel this? Was this your feeling when you did this film that you?
No, but it feels like it works really well when we're looking at now. It's like what a fun way to start a film. Like you take the most, like, how to say, romanticized Swedish version that is like the most popular TV program in Sweden, and this sing-along program with everybody singing together and pretending that everything is just perfect, and at the same time it's a very, how to say, to fit into that audience, you also have to be very conform. You have to be in a very specific way, and just like, okay, now we're going to look in a complete different direction. And you have this little boy that is 12 years from Göteborg, and they are singing Stockholm in my heart. You know, like it's like about forcing the audience to look at a different part of Sweden, and then now we are going to lift every single stone and look what's under it, and everything that is not like with makeup and like nice behavior, where I'm going to give you everything else. So it was fun to see the start. It's kind of smart, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Talking about starting films, your latest film, The Square, is kind of has the same start actually. With like this cultural product that is breaking down with the statue. Did you think about this relationship?
I have never thought about that it's similar, but
even though there is an accident, even here it is sabotage, but
it's
the old forms collapsing, old art forms collapsing.
But when you're starting a movie, I mean, it's fun if you manage to make a setup that is the audience is like, bam, now I'm in it. No, okay, there's someone that wants to turn things upside down, or you want to throw the audience into something that is unexpected. What is going to happen here, and in which way you are doing that is like it's fun to think about the start often.
And then in the Guitar Mongoloid, there are so many strange images and interesting and things that are maybe sometimes difficult to understand why they are there. Why did you make this film like that?
I think there was a way for me to approach fiction movies. When I was making Family Again, there were some scenes that I showed for Kalle Boman, that is like a film nestor in Sweden, like he'd been working with Marie-Louise Ekman and Roy Andersson and Bo Widerberg. And he was a teacher at the school at that time, and when I was there. And I showed him some scenes that I was filming with my father, and I told him that we were taking it over and over again. And he said, well, you basically are working like Bo Widerberg is working with his fiction film. So it's no difference between documentary, how you approach documentary and you approach fiction. And when he said this, I was like, aha, so I actually can make fiction movies. This had never crossed my mind. I thought that fiction movies would be like a process that is completely different. And when he said it, then it was like a click. And okay, so I can approach fiction in this way. And I had watched a movie that was called Gamma of Harmony Korine that had a great impact on me, which was a very fragmentaric movie that starts with a tornado that is just turning things upside down in that little village in the middle of the country of the US, and then it's aiming the camera to all these different kind of odd personalities that is in that village. And I think it was a great inspiration for me when I was doing this film, and I started to aim camera toward like these authentic, unpolished people and situations that we most of the time when it comes to fiction movies is trying to cut out or leave out. And there was one thing with Allsång på Skansen, this sing-along program that was like on the program that you got when you went to the sing-along event. Then from one year to another, on the cover it was a guy with a yellow cap that you could tell he was handicapped in some way. Had some kind of limitation, in dysfunctional limitation, I don't remember. But from one year to another, he was replaced with a blonde woman, and suddenly they had paintbrushed him away, or like in Photoshop, just cloned him away. And it was like also like a certain kind of irritation that we are trying to protect ourselves from everything that is disturbing, or so it's like let's go into everything that is disturbing, basically.
And this film certainly disturbed some people. It got some great reviews, but it also received a lot of quite harsh criticism.
Yeah.
How did you feel?
No, but I think I would have been disappointed if it didn't go in that way. But we did something quite fun with the DVD cover, because when you rent the DVD in the stores, then it was like the best Swedish film of the year, and there was like a couple of fives and all the fours that you got as a review. And then when you get home and you're opening it up, then it says the worst Swedish film of the year, and then it was all the ones and the twos. So it was also a way of trying to neutralize criticism and stand above it and not let that decide if you feel that you have succeeded with the film or not. So yeah.
If this film created some conversation and some discussion about film, your next film certainly did that a lot. It was called Involuntary, and let's watch a clip from that one.
Hej igen. Hej. Är alla mätta och belåtna? Härligt. Jag tror att alla har kommit på plats, men om det är så att någon saknar någon så vill jag att ni säger det nu. Så inte jag kommer från någon. Ingen? Bra. Vi ska strax åka, men först vill vår busschaufför Henrik säga ett par ord.
Ja, jag vill bara säga att varje gång som vi gör ett stopp vid den här rastplatsen så brukar jag gå igenom bussens olika utrymmen. Och den här gången när jag gjorde det så upptäckte jag någonting väldigt tråkigt. Och för mig får ni gärna spela lite musik och tjoa och kimma en aning, men ha sönder saker på bussen, det kan jag bara inte acceptera. Det tror jag de flesta förstår.
Vad är det som har hänt då?
Vad sa du?
Vad är det som har hänt?
Ja, det är en grej på toaletten. Alltså det är någon som har haft sönder någonting på toaletten. Men det spelar inte så stor roll vad det är, men det funkar bara inte. Jag vet inte hur ni brukar bete er hemma, men ombord på den här bussen så får vi i alla fall följa vissa regler.
Är det någon av oss som har varit på toa eller? Nej. Vad är det som har gått sönder då?
Ja, det är inte så intressant. Det är en gardinstång som har gått sönder, men det spelar inte så stor roll vad det är. Men jag vet inte, vi är ett litet familjeföretag. Alltså.
Ja.
Vi liksom blir personligt drabbade när någonting sånt här händer.
Ja, vi fattar det, men liksom, vi har inte gjort någonting. Ja, det är synd om era familjer, men det är inget jag kan varken ta hänsyn till, för jag har inte kört din buss.
Nej, jag vet inte vem som har gjort det. Jag anklagar ingen särskilt, men jag tycker det ingår i någon slags normalhyfs att man vågar erkänna om man har gjort en sån här grej.
Vi har inte ens varit på toa. Vad säger du nu? Det kändes ganska träffande faktiskt när du kommer fram just till oss här. Men...
Ja, det är upp till dig om du känner dig träffad, men jag tycker det är dålig stil.
Ja, det är jävligt dålig stil. Det är upp till dig att köra bussen.
Det är ingen idé att snacka om det på det här sättet.
Jag kör det.
Ja, hallå. Jag tycker verkligen det är dåligt. Jag tycker att när en sån här sak händer så kan den som har gjort det komma fram och erkänna det för mig. Tyvärr så känner jag faktiskt att jag inte vill köra vidare härifrån förrän jag har fått veta vem som har gjort det. Ja, den här gången var det en gardinstång som gick sönder, men nästa gång kan det lika gärna vara någonting som påverkar bussens säkerhet och då kan jag inte köra vidare. Så jag hoppas ni har förståelse för att vi blir stående här tills någon kommer att prata om mig.
Kör bussen!
Dum i hela huvudet!
In Sweden, many people talk about Norén Christmas as like from the playwright Lars Norén and how you imagine a Christmas in his place. And but nowadays you hear more and more people also talking about Ruben Östlund's situation, and I think this is kind of started with Involuntary and maybe specifically those scenes on the bus where the bus driver refuses to drive the bus before someone has stepped in front and said, I destroyed the thing on in the bathroom. how do you feel about this? People talking about Ruben Östlund's situation, and what was it that you wanted to create with this
Of course,
scene?
you get proud when you hear that, and I mean, I think that when you make the audience or the one that have experienced your film start to look at life in a slight different way and being able to discover situations in life in a slight different way because they have a reference from your films, then that's exactly what art is about for me. That is like someone have given you a certain point of view that makes you experience life in a slight different way. And for me, like I have talked a lot about Roy Andersson, that I think that Roy Andersson have made me be able to enjoy small trivial moments in life that would have passed by and I would never have noticed them if I haven't seen his film. So he widens my perspective and my spectrum of looking at life. And if you manage to do that, then people are referring to you, then that's beautiful, of course.
This film has 5 different stories or storylines intertwined, and they're all in some way about the problem of being together as a group and how to act as a group. Why did you want to do a film with this subject that has been?
This came out of maybe from the work of the Guitar Mongoloid, because the individuals or the characters in Guitar Mongoloid, they were relating to the group in a complete different way. They were not afraid of making a fool of themselves. And they don't try to keep the face all the time. And then I started to think about situations where people were very scared of losing face, and where you were very dependent, your behavior is very dependent on the group or the expectation that group have on you. And I started to look through, you start to think about your life, you start to think about stories that you heard of, you start to from a thematical point of view, me and Eric started to talk about what kind of situations have we experienced where people are very afraid of losing face in front of the peer group, or like a bus journey, or like a social situation where you start to do things in a different way that you want to, just because of the expectation of the group. And for example, this one with the bus ride, it was like I probably was a teenager when I heard about this story the first time. It was a friend of me that told me he was going down to the Alps on a bus journey, and he broke the curtain in the toilet of this bus, and he didn't think that much about it. Tried to put it up, but it didn't work really. But he got back to his seat, and then they stopped at the Raststätte in Germany somewhere along Autobahn. And then when he came back into the bus again, the bus driver was really upset. And the way that he pointed out, the moment when you have 2 choices. Either you say it was me, or you keep your mouth shut. And that's a classical dilemma. You have 2 options or more, none of them are easy. Because if you're saying it was me, it's going to be embarrassing for you. And if you're not saying anything, let's see what happens. Maybe it's going to be even worse. And there was this moment when you have not said something, and the bus driver went over, and instead of driving away and continuing the journey, he turns off the bus and he says, actually, I will not continue before the one who did this confesses. And then you have a small window when you can say, hey, it was me. But if you miss that window, it's going to be harder and harder all the time to admit that it was you. And it was something just, you could relate so strongly with the situation. And I think that all the different storylines in Involuntary is very, very simple. It has one starting point of when the snowball starts rolling and just builds up, and because you have ended up in a dilemma and you did the wrong decision. And all of them comes either from my own experience, they're inspired of things that Eric told me, or friends have told me. And it was something also, to try not to look for the most dramatic events, to look for the trivial, small events, but we can relate to the mechanism in it, and we can also apply it on all different kind of human situations. So I would say this is also maybe the first time that where I'm like going into a little bit like sociology, like you're looking for a setup of a situation that we can relate to and we can understand. Wow, I would also have done that. And there are scenes in the film that is also completely like taken from sociological experiment in the film, like the Solomon Asch conform theory or conformity test, or what's it called, where you're pointing on which line that is the longest one, and you have a collective or a group that is always saying the opposite. And finally, you will change your mind. You will start to point on the smallest line and the shortest line and say, this is the longest one. Yeah. So it was really like the kind of, how to say, power the group have over the individual, and in which way it affects us. And yeah.
I don't know how much you can influence these kind of things as a filmmaker, but your films sometimes get quite funny titles in France. Force Majeure, for example, was called Snow Therapy, and Involuntary was had the ironic title Happy Sweden. Do you feel that there's something really Swedish about this kind of mechanism, or is it just how the French look at it?
I think that the French, as soon as there's, it's funny because when the French are distributing a foreign language film in the French cinemas, then they always want to give it an English title. So, and Force Majeure, I was like, it's great, it's a French title, you know, and they're like, no, it's not possible, we have to have an English title. No, but I mean, I don't like either Snow Therapy or Happy Sweden as titles on Force Majeure or Involuntary. But at the same time, I have full respect for the distributors that is fighting to get an audience to go and look at the films. And I mean, if they really, really believe in these titles and they are fighting hard for it, I can also say, yeah, sure, if you believe in it, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, but and how do you feel about the title Happy Sweden in the meaning as an analysis of your film, so to speak, that is something Swedish about this?
Yeah, maybe it is something Swedish. I don't know. But my feeling was when I've been screening the films, like in France, for example, and I feel that everybody can relate to the fear of losing face, and they can relate to the situation. So. Yeah, and this was a film that so many people could relate to. It was a film that everybody was talking about, and it was also a film that got a lot of praise and a lot of success. It was screened in Cannes, and it got like Guldbagge awards in Sweden. And like, what was the point when you realized, hey, I'm now a famous filmmaker, and I'm a successful filmmaker, and I'm not just some guy making films? I remember, the joy of being accepted in Cannes was fantastic, because we had said when we started with the project, our goal is to be on Cannes Film Festival, and we were using that as like something that is pushing up the bar and increasing our own performance and trying harder and harder, and like also taking the right business connection in order to make this happen. We started to work with Philippe Aubert, has the production company co-production office. We still work together. So it was something it was an approach that was getting us out in Europe, and because we also understood the kind of movies that we are interested in, we need to go on an international arena because Sweden is too small. And so it was actually career decision, and at the same time also, in Cannes, the movies that we were inspired of and the filmmakers that we thought was the cool ones, they were in Cannes, so we wanted to go there. So when you got the call, like, okay, you have been accepted for the program in Cannes in Uncertain Regard. I mean, I was walking on clouds that day. I remember I was in Stockholm and we were working with the sound, with the sound mixer. And I didn't take the subway that day because I was on Kungsholmen. I was walking all the way to Söder, and the feeling was like you were walking a little bit higher than the ground. And it was a very pleasant feeling to have a goal and then achieve that goal. So, and then we was very proud when we were in Cannes. And I remember we met the Danish industry in Copenhagen airport when we were changing flight to go to Cannes. And the Danes didn't have a film in Cannes that year. And we were like, yeah, now finally, like the Swedes are like cooler than the Danes when it comes to filmmaking.
After Involuntary, you did 2 films about crimes based on real crimes. First, the short film Incident by a Bank, and then the feature film Play. And even though they are about crime, you you have to stretch it maybe to call them Nordic noir or something like that. But maybe you can call them true crime. I don't know. How do you feel those? Why did you turn to crime, and how does these films, do you feel, relate to the traditional criminal film?
Well, the first film that you're talking about then is called Incident by a Bank. That was a short film, and the reason that I wanted to make that film was because me and Eric had an experience of being witnesses to a robbery attempt, and that experience in itself was so absurd and was clashing completely towards the references that I had seen in movies. So when I was like looking at reality on the other side of the street and what was going on, I couldn't recognize reality. For me, it looks like no, something is completely absurd. It shouldn't look this way. So I realized when we were experiencing that thing that all the reference that I had from fiction movies had really changed my perception of reality and made it much harder for me to really react and act in a way that was the proper way of acting in that situation. I mean, I become like a complete bystander, like Eric asking if we should call the police, but I'm saying like, no, there's no reason. They were trying to rob NK in Stockholm, that it's an exclusive shop. I was like saying, no, it's no reason because, you know, they have a button under the desk and they just push it and then the police comes. Something that I have not a clue about, but I have maybe seen in fiction movies. And so when experiencing this, I felt also that I want to give a reference of this event to that can correct also all the images that I had seen that have created this wrong image in my head. And this is not only me that have been interested in this discussion. I would say that Kalle Boman had talked a lot about like how culture references are changing our perception on the world and changing our behavior, and especially moving images that is hard to, how do you say, separate from a real memory. And there's so many examples of how moving images actually is like pushing out our real memories or our real reference of the world. For example, if you talk to Vietnam veterans today, most of their, ideas about what happened in the Vietnam War have been exchanged of moving images they have seen, and their own experience actually have been pushed out of their reference bank. So when approaching like the incident by a bank, it was fun to discuss these things. It was fun also to talk about why is our area as filmmakers important, why is culture important, why is the kind of references and how we portray the world, why is it important? Because it's also coloring people, it's also changing people's behavior, it's going to change the way that they look at the world. And that kind of critical approach towards your profession is super important. I think you should be aware of that. If you're creating certain kind of images of the world, you maybe are going to create this behavior. People are going to start to imitate this behavior. And there's like example of it that I think is fun to talk about, and I've done it many times before, but Robert Saviano, that wrote the book Gomorrah about the mafia in Neapel, he said that a couple of months after Quentin Tarantino movie had been released in the world, the young gangsters in Neapel started to shoot with a gun on the side like this, like in the gangsta style grip. And the consequences of that is that it's very hard to hit each other. So the shootout became much longer and much more bloody, and the police had a mess cleaning up afterwards. So even if it's not really efficient and it's kind of bad to try to aim towards someone like that, even if it's so irrational, people are imitating this. And I think we have to look at human being from that kind of perspective. Even how irrational it is, we are still not being able to sort it out from our brain, and it still is going to affect our behavior. And we have to evaluate what kind of images do I want to give to an audience? Which kind of images do I think is lacking? Which kind of images do I think is needed? How do I add something to a discussion about something that is going on? Am I just playing on the cliches? Am I just using the same cliches? Am I just hammering in the same kind of scenario? Or am I broadening the perspective for the audience? And
what you're doing in this scene is that you're not following the robbery from up close. You're not. It's not a big thrill to watch this film. It's not fast cutting, or it's not. You're not even with the robbers. You're in a quite. You put the camera in quite a distance, and you film it from afar. What does that create for you?
Well, I mean, I think that I wanted to have a distance to it and not, how to say, an overview, to look at it from a sociological point of view, like look at human behavior, look at how we are relating to each other and the distance from the different characters. And in order also to try to create a true, a more accurate and true how to say, reconstruction of the events that I had witnessed. I needed to use the real time, because I think that this thing that happened where me and Eric was the eyewitnesses, maybe it was over in 5 minutes or something like that. And with the real time, it's also interesting because guns going off is not going to be the most dramatic moment. It will be just as dramatic or evaluated in the same way as everything else that happens when you have real time. So the style of the film became more like a surveillance camera that is just filming this street, and we made it into a bank instead. And using the red camera, that was also like using a new technique. And the red camera that was shooting in 4 and 5K at that time, I think, but still we were only projecting maximum 2K. So thinking of like, okay, maybe we can zoom into the digital negative in the editing and create all the camera movements afterwards. So the whole film was filmed with a fixed camera, and then all the camera movements and actually cuts in the film is hidden in pans and so on. So the reconstruction is feeling like an 11-minute, I think, real-time event. And I wanted to bring in the absurdities that I experienced when I watched the robbery. You know, the guns were going off, and I thought that, like, will not everybody stop and everybody will look and people will throw themselves down on the street? But instead, it was completely opposite. It was people, tourists, coming closer with an ice cream in their hand and wanted to see what's happening. And me and Eric started to film with our mobile phones, and we were complaining a little bit that you can't zoom on the mobile phone. At that time, you couldn't do it at all. And there was so trivial things going on. And it was one moment that really, really was affecting me. And it was in the end, one of the robbers had been caught, and he was pushed down on the street, and he was laying with his face towards the asphalt. And he probably had the most dramatic moment in his life. And suddenly Eric and me is like looking at the watch, but oh my God, we have to leave because we are going to a meeting at Swedish Film Institute. And do you know the way? Yeah, sure. And we were just like 20 meters far away from each other, but we were completely two different places in our life and in like the experience of everything that was going on at that moment. So it was like a strong feeling of everybody's playing the main character in our life, of course, and life will continue even if you have just experienced this. You are going to deal with all the trivialities and all the bureaucracy and all the sad things that you don't see in the movies. That is what he's going to deal with now. And
and you use some of the same visual strategies also for your next feature film, Play, which is also about a crime. It's about a group of young boys who are robbing another group of young boys. And let's watch a clip from this. In this clip, you're quite close to the characters, but usually you are, as in Incidents by Bank, you see them from quite afar. But let's watch the clip first.
De kommer där, mamma.
Jag kommer. Kan jag få se på din mobil?
Va?
Kan jag få se på din mobil?
Varför då?
Jag ska bara kolla en grej.
Om jag får tillbaka. Låt mig bara se på din
Klart
mobil.
Du får tillbaka den.
Om jag får tillbaka den.
Ja, det är klart du får tillbaka den. Hör du trög? Ser ut som tjuv, eller?
Jag kommer ihåg.
Vad var det för helgen?
Hemma. Hur?
Du gick för mig nu, va?
Nej.
För min brorsa blev rånad och misshandlad förra helgen. Han blev av med exakt en sån här mobil.
Okej, men alltså det där är min.
Du gick inte.
Ta det lugnt, okej? Vet du att det är han? Du vet inte om det är han eller hur?
Bevisa till din mobil.
Ja, men vadå?
Vänta. Bevisa till din mobil då, eller?
Men jag kan inte be om bevisa.
Vänta. Bevisa. Ja, men kvitto.
Idiot, har du på dig kvitto?
Men ta det lugnt, Abdi.
Vänta, har du på dig kvitto?
Ta det lugnt, okej?
Det är värdelöst.
Men du kan inte skrika på honom. Har han vet om han har gjort någonting, eller?
Döm honom inte i förväg.
Eller hur?
Shit.
Fan, gå och döma vem som helst med en sån mobil här annars.
Ha? Ja, jag går och ringer.
Jag skulle ta vad jag...
Ska jag få den? Har ni något annat bevis?
Va?
Ha?
Vad sa du?
Har du något annat bevis?
Jag tror inte.
Ha?
Jag tror inte det. Vad ska jag göra då?
Han gav ett kvitto som bevis att det är din mobil.
Men det är inte så att han går runt med kvittot.
Nej, men jag har inte sagt att han går runt med kvitto.
Men ta det lugnt.
Jag säger bara, är det din enda bevis?
Annars gå till Abdis eller gå till Abdi.
Vänta, nej.
Vadå nej? Du kan inte stå här och döma honom, eller hur? Bilder.
Vi vet inte om det är han.
Tror du jag är en idiot eller?
Anna.
Man kan bara ta bilder. Vem tror
Men kan
jag
du
är?
sluta eller? Hallå, snälla.
Du ska döma honom i förväg.
Ursäkta våra kompisar, de är som de är. Deras temperament.
Ja, temperament.
Ja, eller hur? De får ta det lugnt, de kan inte hålla på med den attityden. Aldrig fler med.
Alltså jag kan ju säga till att jag var med och köpte den. Så.
Jag lovar, jag var med när han köpte den.
Nej killar, jag tror inte heller ni har tagit mobilen alltså, men man måste försöka lösa det här på ett bra sätt. Så lyssna bara på dem, okej? Jag vet att det kan vara jobbigt och så, men inga precisioner man direkt vill lyssna på, men gör bara det nu, okej?
Jag pratade med min brorsa precis. Han är en bit bort härifrån. Vi ska gå till honom. Vi köper mobiler för han. Han ska avgöra om det är hans eller inte.
Jag vill inte följa med.
Vad sa du?
Jag vill inte följa med. Jag har inte kodit.
Okej, du kan stanna här med mobilen. Jag kan gå till honom.
Nej, vad ska jag...
Alltså jag ger inte två alternativ. Jag säger bara nej hela tiden.
Abdi, ja, jag vet, men ta det lugnt, okej?
Shit, har du bättre alternativ eller?
Håll käften,
Vänta, är det det enda du kan säga eller?
Håll käften, okej?
Nej, vänta, säg någonting annat
Men
än
tyst
mig.
annars, okej? Det här kommer inte hjälpa.
Jag satt emot.
Men håll käften, okej? Det räcker. Håll käften, okej? Tror ni vi kommer någonstans med att ni står här och skriker, eller? Tror ni de vill följa med? Ja, men tyst. Tror du de vill följa med? Tror du de blir rädda för det, eller hur? Tror du han vill följa med om ni står och skriker på honom?
Låt honom säga någonting annat.
Nej, men då så, käften, låt honom säga vad han vill. Låt honom säga vad han vill annars, okej? Låt honom säga vad han vill. Tyst nu, okej? Jag snackar med honom nu. Tyst, okej?
Vad sa du?
Varför kan inte han komma hit?
Idiot! Han är rädd för er. Han blev
Det räcker nu, okej?
Vad är det för dum fråga han frågar?
Det räcker, ja, det är en dum
Har
fråga, men
något i
det
livet,
räcker,
eller?
okej? Det räcker. Låt mig snacka med honom nu. Håll käften, okej?
Vad är det för dum fråga
Håll
han frågar?
käften, sa jag till dig.
Vad?
Okej, Sebastian, lyssna här. Du vet Sebastian, eller? Ja. Alltså kolla här, han är precis här runt hörnet. Det tar inte lång tid. Ni vill inte ha bråk, vi vill inte heller ha bråk. Ursäkta, de förmedlar detta på ett dumt sätt. För det är jätteviktigt för honom eftersom det är hans lillebrorsa. Och det är viktigt för er också eftersom jag förstår att ni blir rädda. Bara följ med och visa upp mobilen så att brorsan kan få kolla på mobilen. Då får du gå sen när han har kollat. Det är inte svårare än så. Sen är det klart, sen behöver vi aldrig mer prata med er och ni behöver aldrig mer prata med oss.
So the scene is the start of a process that is a robbery, but it's really long. It's like it's turning to some kind of game almost, where those 5 young black kids are robbing these 3 middle-class kids. And this is also your first film, your first feature that has one long story throughout. Why did you choose to make a film like with one story for the first time and this story?
No, but I think it's because of the content of the film that changes the way that you are approaching it. As I said before, like Force Majeure, I was thinking about approaching it with 4 different stories, but then you find a content or a topic that is, when you put it into the feature film format, it's much better if you tell a single story. When it came to play, then it was the starting point of play was that Erik Hemdahl showed me an article about a certain kind of robberies that took place in the center of Göteborg in Nordstan Femmanhuset. That is a big mall in the center of the city. And these kind of robberies that the article was about had been going on for many years. and the setup of the robberies were like really interesting because it was small kids robbing other small kids, or like between 12 and 14 years old, and suddenly you have a situation where the young kids are walking around with a mobile phone in your pocket that it may be costing 500 euros or something like that. And in Nordstan, which is the melting pot of Göteborg, is a place where all the different city parts are getting together. So you have all the different kind of class connections and things like that meeting each other. It's basically one of the only places where you can see all the different kind of socioeconomic groups that are included in the area of Göteborg. And the robbery took place with a rhetorical trap. So the robbers were walking up to kids that they saw were new in the city, and maybe were there for the first or the second time without their parents, going up to them and asking, do you know what time it is? And the victims immediately feels like there's something strange going on, but they bring out the cell phone to check what time it is, and immediately when the robbers see the cell phone, they go, hey, where did you get that from? My brother was robbed the other day. He had exactly a phone like that. So they create a problem that doesn't exist, and in order to solve this situation, they say, we're going to show the cell phone to my kid brother that is just outside this mall on a street, so we have to go there and show it to him. And if you have not stolen it, there's no reason of you to be scared. Then he will just say it's not his phone, and then you can leave. And the robbers were also using characters like bad cop and good cop. So one of the robbers, they were actually, going stone, scissors, bag before to decide which role they were going to play in the setup of the robbery. So one robber is playing bad cop and another robber is playing good cop. So immediately when the victims were getting a little scared, then they go, hey guys, I believe in you, there's no problem, but you don't need to feel scared if you have not stolen the cell phone. And they also use things like they are saying, our kid brother is there with our mother. So they're also like pretending that it's like an adult that is over there in order to get these boys to leave the mall and go to this a little bit more, calm street where they were robbed then. And it was very interesting when it came to these robberies. They were going on for many, many years. And people were seeing that something was going on, and they were passing by really, really close because there was a lot of people in these malls, of course. But still, it was very hard for the adult world to interact. So it was almost like the kids' world were taking place on one level, and the adults' world were taking place on another level, and that it was like a wild west for the kids, and the interaction, like the adults that maybe could take some kind of responsibility, didn't interact, and it was like the social contract between how you look at other kids was completely different than, for example, when my parents' generation was brought up. So it was a lot of these kind of aspects that were interesting. And then, of course, it was one aspect that really was the reason that I wanted to make the film, and it was that the robbers that was from the real events, they had one thing in common, and it was that they were black. So suddenly occurs an image that is very hard to relate to, and very hard to talk about, like 5 black boys robbing middle-class boys, or like white boys in the center of Göteborg, where basically it's like where these two social groups are meeting. And why is that image so provocative? Why do we have this problem talking about it? And when I remember pitching the film, where every time I was pitching the film, and I told about the setup of this situation, I could see in the eyes of the person that is listening that they get a problem. And so it was just something that we had hard time to verbalize. We have a hard time to talk about this. Is that good? Is it something that we have to need to bring up to the surface and investigate why we have a problem talking about this? But still at this point I have not decided to make the film. But I started to do some research. And I started to interview victims. I started to interview some of the boys that actually were the robbers. I interviewed police, psychologists, and things like that, and trying to figure out like what really had been going on and what the motivation was, and so on. And I thought maybe in the beginning, that of course, I understood that there's some kind of enjoyment in the play or the game that they are pushing up to controlling, and I didn't believe that it was only that the boys, the robbers, didn't have cell phones, that they were poor and so on. And very quickly I got to know also that the robbers, they had got to know each other through a football team. They were playing together in a football team. And that the robbers also was very aware of how to use their skin color as an outspoken threat to the boys that they were doing the robbery. So, and they were talking about like the references that comes from some culture and so on. Like you could tell that it have made an impact on them and how they look on their possibilities, and when they are fantasizing about the future. Like, okay, I have this stigmatized skin color, and then like, in which way can I fantasize about my future? I'm going to walk on Paul's, the bread factory, and so on. Of course, it's also connected to where they are in the city, or maybe mostly connected to where they are in the city, and which kind of socioeconomic part of Göteborg they are in. But when I did this interview with one of the robbers, he told me very unspoken. We're very aware of how to use this, and you immediately understand like what kind of impact these kind of how do you say, images that they are meeting in fiction movies and media report and so on is also creating a circle, and they are imitating a certain kind of behavior. And that was the point when I really decided I wanted to do this film, and yeah.
But this film also, after it was released, it also stirred a big debate in Sweden, and some people talking about that you were reinforcing this kind of stereotypes, and some people even call it racist, this film. Like now, when you look back at this debate, how do you feel about it now?
I think it's interesting because I think that like the leftish people that believe in socialism and like a certain kind of idea about how you should approach problems in our society. I mean, I still think it's a debate that that there are preconceived thoughts on what you should think and what you should talk about when it comes to these kind of socioeconomic and immigration problems and so on. And I think still we have a hard time to talk about these things. And I mean, I think that when I look at the decisions that I made the film, and I still believe in that like there's a motivation for me why you want to do a film like this and why you want to raise this question, and why you want to create something that is rather like exposing like the idea about the stereotypes and exposing a problem that maybe happened, because you also can do it in order because you care about the boys that are the robbers. They're just kids. Like it's also taking their motivation and history and so on for real, and like want to bring it up to the light because of the consequences for them. So I mean, I think it's still interesting to talk about it, but it was such a stigmatized image with these boys, and it was so obvious to see that it was hard to talk about, and still I think we have a hard time talking about it.
Yes, it's what struck me when I watched the film again and also read some of the articles that was written, then is how the discussion on this topic has changed since then. Also, nowadays this kind of robbings is very much talked about, and it's very much like almost a symbol that is heavily used by the extreme right in many ways, bringing these kind of robbings and these kind of crimes up. Have you noticed this changed in the discussion also?
No, but I mean, what happened when we started to make play and after play was finished was that the Sweden Democrats were like one of the players, like a politician party in the government, and so it was a lot of things that was going on at that time, and I think, I mean, I think that it have been also more accepted to talk about what are the consequences of immigration, what is the consequences of having working force coming from other European countries coming to Sweden, and which group in our society is it affecting, and how does it change things, and that even if it's not like this yet, I think that the solidaric feeling you can feel with people that is handling this problem and actually daring to look at it, and actually daring to look at the consequences of we are trying to deal with this problem, and understanding that there will be a friction in our society when we are trying to do it, still doesn't say that we don't want to make sure that we are trying to help them. But we have to take the problem from not only from like a middle class that is living in a part of the city that don't care about this or don't have to handle any consequences of the kind of immigration politics or what we are doing. We have to look at it from the whole society, and also and it doesn't mean that is not going to have a generous immigration politics and things like that. And I think this discussion is a little bit more in the society, but still, yeah. It's hard when it comes to these questions that have been so, how to say, labeled as, in this topic you should think like that because then you are left wing, or in this topic you should think like that because then you are right wing. And if you don't do it, then suddenly you are like breaking the expected convention about this. So you have to deal with a lot of other questions than actually talk about the problem in itself.
And does it hurt you that people have been criticizing you in this way?
No, not really. I think you're always stressed when you are in something that is going on in the media, and you're especially stressed when it's something that you don't are in control of. And when it comes to the media landscape today, when journalists is writing articles about other articles, then all of a sudden many people have not watched the film that is commenting on it. And so that is stressful, of course, but I felt like we were very careful when we were working with this film, and the decisions that we made came from a long research and talking to people that have a lot of experience when it comes to these topics. We really wanted to know exactly how to like label everything that we were talking about, and the decisions that we made when we make it was very carefully done. So I felt that I felt that I was quite prepared of talking about the film, and therefore also you can handle the kind of debate that is going on in a better way.
And after this film, your next project was Force Majeure, the film we have mentioned already, but this was also maybe your big international breakthrough in a way, to another level, that really made you world famous. And this is a film about responsibility, about fatherhood and masculinity, maybe. And it's a film about marriage also, maybe?
Maybe.
Yeah.
About the nuclear family and the idea and expectations you have of the role of the woman and the role of the father in a nuclear family. And
let's watch a short clip. We mentioned already maybe the most iconic film from the scene with the avalanche, but let's watch maybe the clip that is so much talked about and loved in this film, which is when and the father in the family starts to cry a lot.
Yeah.
Jag är också jättebesviken på honom. Fan, jag hatar honom. Jag hatar honom så jävla mycket. Och jag kan inte förlåta det han har gjort, för att han har gjort massa andra saker förut också. Han har liksom ljugit, han har varit otrogen. Han känner, han fuskar i spel när han spelar med Harry och Vera. Fattar du vad patetiskt den här personen är? Och jag Jag kan inte leva med honom längre. Jag vill inte göra det. Det är inte bara du som är ett offer här. Jag är för fan också ett offer. Jag är för fan ett offer för min instinkt.
Hallå? Thomas? Kom in vart, så nu går in. Kom in vart, så nu går. Hallå? Så, nu går vi in, okej? Hur fan man går?
It's very roligt, very fun when we watch this scene now, because I remember when the film was finished and it was one of the distributors that was like connected to the project was like, okay, this can be the end of Ruben's career as a filmmaker. This film is going to be, everybody is not now is not going to. They were very, very provoked of this scene when he's crying and being pathetic in that way, and that Thomas, the character, is like a person that is, being ridiculed, or like, and that he believed that is okay. Now Ruben have made his last film. So it's fun to think back on that these kind of images that is unexpected or maybe disturbing in a way, or they are actually the small edges that makes a film get the quality that makes it last. But at the same time, when you're working with it, and people maybe want to make it like cut off these edges and put it into a place where you can just relate to it to other movies, because it's hard to see what new kind of expressions that actually is going to work with an audience, but then you're trying to make it look like everything else that you've seen before. So
I think why this scene is also so loved, despite those initial hesitations, is also because it's so funny. And I wanted to ask you, how do you work with funny, and how do you work with humor in your film? Do you have a strategy for that?
Well, I think that the approach that I have is kind of similar as stand-up comedy in many ways, that you are trying to look for a situation that the audience can relate to, that is easy to identify with but hard to handle. Like a dilemma, once again. Like you're looking for a setup where all of us can understand, oh my God, how would I behave if I was in this situation? And then from that starting point, you can push the actions in a certain direction, even to an absurd situation like this, and still make it believable. You can bring the audience on, or my own feelings, because that's what it always starts with, of course. Do I believe in this or not? Is this possible for me? What does this scene highlight when it comes to the context of what the action comes from? So, and sometimes you manage to find a situation where kind of absurd behavior actually is possible for the characters. But always have a starting point where, is it relatable? Do I believe in it? And the more an interesting a dilemma is, I mean, like that or in this setup, I actually can relate to the absurdity of what the character is doing and what he's deciding to do, and the better it is, like in a comical approach, to get it. But I always love like scenes in films where the humor is like one step before the audience. So I get kind of provoked when I see humor that is pointed out too obvious to me, because then I feel like, come on, I'm an intelligent person, I'm not stupid. And when you have the kind of humor that you're one step behind, and you understand, am I allowed to laugh about this, or am I supposed to feel sorry for him, or is it like life, that it can be both comical and tragical and absurd at the same time. It's interesting because this kind of approach to a content, it feels that it's kind of hard to do it. The agreement of the audience is so often very, very obvious. This is funny. This is sad. This is important. And to leave that evaluation to the audience in itself, like, do you think it's funny? Do you think it's tragic? Like, it's up to you to decide it, and in many ways.
After this film, Force Majeure, you made your latest film, The Square, which won the Palme d'Or in Cannes. Beautiful prize, of course, and it's a satire of the art world. And it's about this artistic director who is running a museum. And this, I wanted to ask you, this museum is placed in the Royal Castle in Stockholm. I wanted to start with asking, why did you choose this Royal Castle as the environment for this museum?
We were thinking a lot what kind of museum it should be in the film, and I was going to some of the art museums in Europe, the modern art museums, the contemporary art museums, and most of them look like MoMA in New York, like a modern building, and this white cube where you have the exhibitions. But then at one point I was in Stockholm and I still hadn't decided what kind of museum it should be. And not too long ago I had been in Versailles and looked at the museum and the castle in Versailles. And when I was walking to a meeting with Kalle and Erik and Roy, we were just supposed to have a dinner together. I was walking past the Stockholm castle. And the idea came like, wow, isn't it fun if it's like the monarchy is over in Sweden and they don't know what to do with all these old castle buildings, and they have decided to make it a museum of contemporary art. That is also the case of Versailles, that they have parts of it that they use for contemporary art. So it was like a fun setup of taking a symbol value of Sweden, like that is for the royal family, and then build an extension, modern extension, and put it on the royal castle in Stockholm. And I asked Gert Wingård, that is one of the more famous architects in Sweden, can't you build an extension, like the modern extension? And he did that. So it was a fun way of playing with the symbol value when the museum became like a comment in itself.
But monarchy is not over in Sweden, and you recently received the King's Medal from the King.
Yeah.
How many of your films had he watched? Do you know?
I think he said that he prefers Steven Seagal, something like that. Which is, I don't know if it's fun or not, but I think that is interesting though. Because when I was in LA, and when you get nominated for Best Foreign Language Film or Best International Film, that it's called today, then you get invited to a dinner at Sony Pictures. And the reason that Sony's Pictures have this dinner is because before, back in the days, the directors that came from abroad and came to the Oscars to go on this Oscar gala, they got a ticket to Disneyland, and then they went back home. Like they didn't meet their colleagues in the US, so Sony wanted to like build connections between the European and the US directors. And when we were having that dinner, we were sitting around this table, and all the different directors from these different countries, they wanted them to tell what kind of problem they have had with the film because of the lack of freedom of speech in your country. And it was all these different kind of versions. Of course, some of them had problems with this. And when it came to me, okay, so what problem did you have of telling this topic in your country? And now, like US, we are giving you freedom of speech. It's a very interesting approach to what they had to Europe and the countries. And I was just saying, well, in Sweden, I actually have like used the royal castle and the royal family is like that was before I got the medal, but they have no problem with it, and I think I was invited to a dinner at that time, like at the castle and so on. So, in US, they did, like these people, they really didn't want to hear this. They didn't want to hear that there's no problem with freedom of speech in Sweden. They wanted to be like the nation of the one where here we actually can talk open about everything. So yeah, in Sweden you get a medal if you are provoking the royal family or like trying to do something controversial about the royal family.
And this film, I think it's a quite complex film in the way that it's both quite satirical and ridicules the art world, but in the same times, I feel such a fascination for the art world in the film. The way you go into all the details in the museum, all the how you portray all the little parts of the museum. How did you feel about this?
The art world in general.
But the system that you are portraying, the art world system that you are portraying with such joy still, as you're being satirical about it.
Well, I think that the art world, the biggest problem with the art world is probably the same kind of problem that you have in a film festival, and it's how do you make the audience look at the art from the right perspective? How do you make the audience experiencing the art? And the conventions of an art museum, they are so strong. You walk in and you look at an object that is placed on the floor, the exhibition in itself is really the big challenge of art, I would say. So, I mean, I think it's interesting that when you're doing something about the art world, there's like an approach to it that some people are like getting very, hurt that you actually are criticizing the way that they are displaying art. I have no problem to feel that someone is trying to attack the film world and the kind of conventions that we are dealing with, because of course when you get some criticism, it's a possibility to step up and do it in a different way when you can approach these problems and so on. So yeah, it was quite fun to make that movie about the art world, because it created a lot of strong reactions.
Let's watch a scene from the square. Maybe one of the best scenes I've ever seen in Swedish cinema, with a man portraying an ape.
Hello. Stop it. Stop it. Very funny.
So this is once again a scene about somebody breaking the conventions and creating a new state in the room, so to speak. How did you come up with this scene?
From the beginning, it was inspired by American punk rock artist that is called Gigi Allen, as a Gigi All In. And I had seen some of his performances from his concert on YouTube, where he's completely anarchistic. He's doing everything that is forbidden, and the audience is coming to his shows also to participate and getting closer to him. But it's dangerous to get close to him, because if you get too close, you can get a punch in your face. And there's one YouTube clip that you can check out if you want to, that is called Gigi Allen Live in Boston or something like that, where his performance is creating this kind of energy in the room when the audience actually are really, really scared of him. And there was something about like the how to say, he is breaking completely all the social contracts that you build up when you're on a stage, or just build up with the other human beings. Like, it didn't matter if it was women there, he was beating them up. No, like living up to the role of being a man, and you be nice to them or you let them be. So no, it was like a complete anarchistic element that was like completely wild. And I was also inspired of a performance artist that I was having a show at Färgfabriken in Stockholm, where Oleg Kulik is his name. He was playing a dog from one performance that he did. And it was actually a sign next to him where it says, "Beware of the dog." And he had a big chain around his neck. And people that didn't respect this, he attacked them. And I think the whole show ended that he bit the curator's daughter in the leg. And so they actually had to call the police. So, and I think I was like, okay, interested in like to put this kind of character into a room where everybody is dealing with a very fancy dinner. You know, when you are trying to realize which spoon and fork or knife should I use when I eat this dish, and all of a sudden someone comes in and breaks that social contract. And the film, I mean, the square in itself, it's about an art piece that is maybe bringing up questions a little bit about bystander effect. And the whole scene starts with a voiceover that's telling, "Soon you will be confronted by a wild animal. As you all know, the hunting instinct is triggered by weakness. If you show fear, then the animal will sense it. If you try to escape, the animal will hunt you down. But if you remain perfectly still, without without blinking or showing any fear, then you can hide in the herd, safe in the knowledge that someone else will be the prey." So it was trying to highlight that the bystander effect comes from also that the fact that we are herd animals. So when we freeze and we don't know what to do, it's not because we don't want to take responsibility. It's basically because we are scared and we hope that someone else will be the prey.
Except for dealing with the art world, this film is also quite a tender portrait of relationship between the father and his two daughters. Mm-hmm. And you're also a father of two daughters. How personal is this portrayal for you?
No, but I think, yes, of course. It is based on how I relate to them, and also Christian, the way that he brings them to his work and showing what they have as an exhibition on the museum at this point, and the way that I are trying to bring in my daughters to my work. And the girls in the film is also dealing with cheerleading, and I think it was fun because they were approaching cheerleading. My daughters were approaching cheerleading and start with cheerleading, and I had all this prejudice about this sport. I was like, why do they look like small sex symbols, and like what is it with this? And when they started to do it, I saw it was a sport where it's like really a team sport where they're working together. All individuals are important, but the collective is super important also. And it made them very strong when it comes to relying on that they have a group that they have as a secureness in their life, and they also became team players by doing it. I love that they were doing this sport, and that's why there's a lot of ingredients like that. But it's hard to say that all the sides of Christian is of course inspired of things that I can relate to and that I feel I have experienced myself, and also the other characters as usual when you do something.
And let's move on to your new film that you are working with currently, Triangle of Sadness. Then you have moved into the fashion world. But before we go into the maybe what the film is about, can you just tell me a little bit about the process? Because this film was quite hit by the COVID crisis, right? What happened?
Yes, we... first of all, we had to postpone the shooting because we had problems financing the film. It's a great thing to win the Palme d'Or, but what happens after Palme d'Or is like that you're building an air castle that is bigger than like the expectations. So like all the people that are approaching you, all the people you are talking to is like helping up to build up this air castle. And we had a film that we know was like kind of wild. I mean, it starts in the fashion world, goes to luxury yacht and ends on a deserted island. And I wanted a multinational cast, an international cast that is coming from all the different kind of countries. So it was a hard film to finance. But finally when we managed to finance the film and the shooting was starting in Göteborg in February last year, basically a couple of days before the starting shoot, you start to hear something about the virus that is in China, and it's moving closer to Europe. And we try to block this out and not think too much about it, but it was just coming closer and closer and closer. And at a certain point, we realized we are not going to be able to finish the first part of the shooting because we have to have a break. So it was like, of course, a stress moment that you all the time had to relate to, that maybe an actor would not be able to come into Europe when we started the shooting again. I mean, there was occasions when Woody Harrelson was standing on the airport in LA and was not allowed to enter the flight. Oh. So the producer Eric had to have been on his phone and trying to convince them that we have a paper that is allowed to work in Sweden, and all these kind of absurd situations that of course increases the stress for the production, and of course when you take a big economical risk, it's even more increasing the stress. And we managed to hit the second wave of the pandemic also during the shooting. So we were extremely unlucky. At the same time, we have been very lucky because we did over 1,061 COVID tests during the production, and we didn't have a single one that was positive. So we managed to keep a little bubble when we were working together. And so at the same time, I must say it have been one of the most enjoyable shootings I have done, because everybody was working together in such a beautiful way, and it was like those small friction parts that maybe happens on a production. They never happened because people were leaving this out. We didn't have like time for focusing on trivial problems, and everybody was working in the same direction. But you know, it's like a completely new setup that you are trying to relate to. So you also feel like, okay, I'm sorry, I'm not in control. And when you are a director, the worst thing that happens is, of course, if you feel like even if I have the right setup and I'm creating something and it's not playing out how I want it to play out, then you feel completely struck by it and guilty. But this is something that I'm not in control of, and then you also I can let down my guard, and what will happen, you know.
Great. And you have brought some images from the film, and some sketches. But before we start looking at them, maybe you just say a few words of the kind of give the outlines of the story, so we know what we are about to dig into. Yeah, but the first approach of the film is because my wife is a fashion photographer. So when I met her 6 years ago, she started to tell me a lot of things about like the fashion industry and the beauty industry. And I thought it was interesting to look on how beauty becomes a currency. So if you look on the different aspects of being able to climb in a class society, you can say that money and education is very important, but beauty is also an aspect that can make you climb in class society. And maybe if you look at the society we live in, then it's something that conventionally more is used by women, that you marry rich and using your currency with the looks, like the trophy wife idea. And but when you start to look at the fashion industry from the male model perspective, it's happened something very interesting, because the male models are paid maybe 1/4 of what the women are paid. They are one of the few professions where men actually is making less money than women. And they also can use the currency in the looks and the sexuality in order to open up doors. There are possibilities in that industry to do that. But at the same time, it's a very, very short career. So your looks are fading away and you're not going to be active for many years, but you have been used to a certain kind of lifestyle, and the fall back and not being able to live that life is going to be kind of harsh for these people.
And the women in the industry, they can have a kind of approach to this. I'm going to be a trophy wife, so I will marry rich and then I will get out of this lifestyle. So that kind of like satirical, cynical approach that they have to the profession in itself, I thought was interesting. So what I wanted to do was like to take look at the currency in beauty and youth and look at it from 3 different kind of worlds. First in the fashion world, and then we take the 2 main characters, that is this couple, the male and the female model, to a luxury yacht. But unfortunately, the luxury yacht goes under, and billionaires and models and a cleaning lady from the yacht is flushed up on a beach of a deserted island. And suddenly all the hierarchies are gone. And it turns out that the cleaning lady knows how to fish and to make fire. So, and she ends up in the top of the hierarchy. So the hierarchies are flipped. And now comes the interesting question: what will then the male main character Carl do with his beauty currency? Will he use it in some way, or what will be the ways that he's going to use this currency? So that's basically like the setup.
Great. So let's look at the pictures, and then we will get some unique insight to your process also by watching them. What we're watching here is the images from the storyboard of Triangle of Sadness. How are you working with the storyboard in your process?
Well, I mean, I've done this since Force Majeure, basically, that I'm trying to paint storyboard pictures that I think is catching the essence of the scene that I'm working with. And what I do is basically that I Google images that is from the internet, and when I find the right body expression, I use it and do the outline of the figures and work quite long with it. So each and single storyboard image that I'm working with, I put a couple of days or maybe a week or something like that. So it's a process that is going to demand some stamina from you. But why I thought it was interesting to show this is, I mean, when it comes to working with a content like a feature film, that is, you get an idea, you get interested in the idea, and then it takes 3 years or something like that before you actually are going to express what you think about this idea in this visual medium. You have to find a way of keep your interest on the content. And when I'm doing these storyboard pictures, just that it takes a long time is making my mind always brought back to the content of the film, brought back to the idea about the film, how I should work with the film. And maybe I come up with things that is from these different scenes, but I also come up with maybe completely different thoughts and something else. So for me to use these images is a way of like a writing process, but even more meditative. So it's like more of an unexpected thought that comes to me when I work in this way. But and then you can see also on the images that sometimes you feel like we really managed to capture something, and you can see the result of that we have made in the film that are quite similar, but we have actually tried to copy the storyboard image. It's not always like this. But the most important part is find something that draws your attention and keeps your attention for many, many hours, because that's a really good way of getting up with ideas when it comes to the project.
Yeah, these are quite striking images. If you look at the first one, for example, what is it that we see?
You know what is with this image? It's actually the first time when the project got postponed and we didn't get the money that the American financiers had promised us. I was so angry at them. And I was like, fuck this American system, you know, when you always say yes, 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 until you're writing the contract, and that's when you're starting to do the business deal, and all of a sudden it turns out that they're not going to say yes anymore. And I had like a really anger to that, like the American film industry in many ways, even if I understand that it's a different culture. And I wanted to start the film in a much more aggressive way when I got this feeling, and I wanted the male models to do this casting and do this preparation for going on the catwalk when they have the Speedos with the American flag on them, and you have these assistants throwing paint on them, like that, really in an aggressive way. So the scene was really created from when when I was very, very disappointed. And it gave some energy to the film also.
And as you can see, it's when you see the still from the film, how does it correspond to what you thought before?
No, I mean it's basically a copy of the storyboard picture. But it was kind of fun to shoot it because these young men that is playing the male models, they are very vulnerable when they're standing there. It's cold in this room, and they are throwing this paint, and you can see how they react when they get the paint on them. So, and for me, it also felt like a good approach to opening the third film when you basically are aiming the camera towards the man. You know, like in Force Majeure, then it's Thomas. In The Square, it's Christian. And the third time now, we are aiming the camera towards the man and how the man is dealing with contemporary times and all the questions that is in the air. And you have these men going up like this, and they're like throwing paint on them. And hopefully it will bring in the audience in a good way to the film.
There are also some beautiful pictures from the yacht. How was it working to shoot on a boat?
Well, we had the shooting of the yacht in two different parts of the shooting. One, we had a studio that we had built in Trollhättan when we were working with Film Väst, where we have built the interior of the yacht on a big gimbal, where we can tilt the whole room like basically 20 degrees. Because there's one scene that is taking place in a storm where everybody gets very seasick. And so we were working in a studio set that is basically the most beautiful studio set I have ever seen. It's Josefin Åsberg that is working with the scenography, the art department, and the set design. And the detail that she did the interiors is very impressive. I would like everybody to have a look on that when they see the finished film. So parts of it we shot in the interior, in the studio, and then the second part we shot on an exterior on Christina O is the yacht called, and it's Onassis' old yacht. So I mean, an older generation know who Onassis was. He was one of the richest persons in the world at that time, and it was like the crème de la crème of the world's elite that was invited to come to his yacht. It's like Churchill, Marilyn Monroe, Kennedy, Maria Callas, all these people that was part of the Western elite at that time were invited to this yacht. And we're going to blow it up. In the film, it's going to be blown up. And that's basically the end of before we get to the deserted island.
So now you're in the middle of editing this film, and when will it be finished?
From the beginning, the goal was to finish it in May for Cannes this year. But during the circumstances with COVID and so on, we don't even know 100% when Cannes will take place and which form it will take place. So right now I'm in an editing process when I can decide the pace of the editing quite much myself. But still, in the back of my head, May is where we are aiming for. But it's great if we can edit longer. For me, it's a luxury to be able to edit for a longer period, of course. So I'm sitting by myself with a laptop computer, enjoying the material and trying to have an open approach to the material and realize really how I can use it in the most efficient way.
In these days, so many films are postponed and they are not released. And how are you nervous about if it will be possible to release the film in a good way during this year?
I personally, I don't walk around and be nervous of circumstances that I can't control. I just don't have that approach to things. So no, I just feel like, okay, we have to adapt to the kind of world that we are deciding that we want to release the film. And I think also it's not only that okay, it can be a window where you decide to release the film when it's getting a lot of attention just because it's one of the first film in this kind of category that people have been longing for or so on. So there are worse problems in these times, definitely.
Sure. So thank you so much for coming and talking to me, and it's been wonderful listening to you. And congratulations to the award. And don't forget, everybody at home, to watch all of Ruben's film at the retrospective that we're presenting during the festival. Thank you very much.
Thank you.